Why had the radio been dead for 60 hours? Yet now a woman's voice cut through the static. Lieutenant Michael Trent pressed his face into the frozen mud. The ground bit at his skin like broken glass. His lungs clenched with each breath, not just from the cold but from the gunfire snapping above his head. The mountain air was thin, sharp. Every shot cracked like lightning, tearing the fog into ribbons that swallowed sound as quickly as they gave it. He didn't move. He couldn't. The voice in his ear was steady, low, female, controlled. "If you move now," it said, "you'll be dead in 7 seconds. 7. He counted his heartbeat against the number. He didn't argue. He didn't even breathe too hard. On the 6th beat, a rifle cracked somewhere in the distance, so far it felt like it came from another world. One muzzle flash vanished from the ridge. Silence where an enemy had stood. Trent didn't know who she was, didn't know where she was. He only knew this: a ghost had just stepped onto their battlefield. 60 hours earlier, Falcon 3 had been whole. They had landed in the Iron Veil Mountains under cover of night, 4 shadows sliding down onto unforgiving terrain. The mission was supposed to be simple: secure a defecting scientist and exfil before sunrise. One clean snatch and grab. One bird in, one bird out. But the mountains didn't forgive plans. The inbound bird coughed black smoke before it ever reached them. The crash lit the cliffs for a heartbeat before darkness swallowed the fireball. Their exit route burned away with it. The Iron Veil Range wasn't just mountains, it was a cage. Jagged teeth of stone tearing into the clouds, gullies that carried sound for miles. Snow patches slick as glass, fog thick enough to drown in. Every echo sounded like a rifle bolt, every breath like a shout. They were 4 now. Trent carrying command for the first time in real combat, his hands steady outside, shaking inside. Sergeant Dana Morales, the sniper. Her scope never wavered, even when the wind screamed. Her silence was heavier than words. Corporal James Porter, comms man. Brilliant with radios, bitter with people. His temper was a blade, cutting even when it wasn't needed. Specialist Ryan Hale. Heavy weapons, restless, brash. Too quick to talk, too quick to doubt. They had moved in silence, boots crunching on frost-slick stone. The fog didn't hide them. It only made the hunt more intimate. The first shots had come without warning. Branches snapped overhead. Bullets shattered rocks into dust. The team dove into a shallow depression, pinned before they even understood where the fire came from. Falcon 3 contact. Grid 298 heavy fire. Porter's voice broke through the static, climbing too fast. No answer, only dead air. He tried again, harder, his voice cracked. Still nothing. Hale cursed, knuckles white around his rifle. Ammo won't last. We're bleeding dry already. His bravado couldn't hide the tremor in his tone. Morales had said nothing, her cheek pressed to the cold earth, scope sweeping sectors she couldn't see through the fog. Finally she spoke. "Multiple angles, they're bracketing us." That was the truth, brutal, inescapable. Trent had tried to keep his voice level, forcing calm into every word. "We move on my call. Stay low, stay fast. No one hesitates." But even before he could count them down, the radio came alive. Hostiles, East Ridge. 3 shooters behind split granite. Another pair moving low from the north. The voice was female, controlled. Not rushed, not panicked. Every syllable carried weight. For a breath they all froze. Hale's mouth opened, but no sound came. Porter's hands trembled over the radio. Morales narrowed her eyes, suspicion flickering, but only for a moment. Because the voice wasn't vague, it wasn't guessing, it was exact, too exact. "No way," Hale muttered almost to himself. "It's her." Trent wanted to ask who. He wanted to demand a name, proof, anything. But another burst of fire cracked overhead, too close. He had no space for questions. The voice came again, as if she had been listening the whole time. "First move, Morales." Shift northeast 20 meters, horseshoe rocks covering fire ready. Morales didn't hesitate, she bolted. Boots crushed ice into shards, fog wrapping her outline like smoke. Tracers stitched the path around her, fire hissing through the mist. Then a single shot echoed from somewhere unseen. One enemy muzzle flash blinked out. Morales dove into cover intact. It was impossible, but it was real. Morales's breathing crackled faintly in the headset. She didn't thank the voice. She didn't even question it. She simply chambered another round. Trent's gut twisted. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't command. But against the fog and the rifles closing in, it was the only chance they had. The woman's voice guided them again, clear, precise. Porter, 15 meters north, then cut left. You have 5 seconds before the next shift. Morales fired at the same instant. Another muzzle flash died. Porter sprinted, sliding behind rock as bullets tore the stone he'd just vacated. Trent followed. He didn't think. He just moved when she told him to. Each call opened a path. Each shot cut the enemy's grip piece by piece. The battlefield shifted, not because of Trent's orders, but because of the ghost watching them. Hale resisted, his voice sharp, suspicious. Could be a setup, someone feeding us to the wolves. His eyes darted everywhere, restless, distrust burning hot. Morales didn't look up from her scope. Nobody shoots like that unless it's her. Her voice was flat, certain. You saw the angle, that was impossible. And then came the proof. A scout climbed higher ground, binoculars raised. His helmet glinted faintly through the fog. The shot that dropped him threaded a space no wider than a hand span, between stone pillars that should have made it impossible. He never even lifted the glass to his eye. Hale cursed under his breath, doubt cracking in his chest, but he said nothing more. The radio flared again, her tone unshaken. South slope, 2 gunners behind basalt outcrop. They will fire on your next move. Not a warning, a statement of fact. Trent clenched his jaw. He nodded to Morales. She didn't question. Her rifle cracked twice. Both silhouettes dropped before they could pull their triggers. Morales's breath hitched just for a second. She muttered into the mic almost like she didn't mean to be heard. That's a wind call through fog. She's reading gusts by sound. Hale spat the words out like denial. That's not real. It is, Morales said coldly. If you've done it enough, echo tells you more than sight. Another burst rattled the stone above them, forcing them all down. Porter curled around his radio like a shield. We're pinned again. The reply was calm as ever. Wait 2 seconds. They held their breath. A distant shot rang out, surgical final. And the fire stopped, just stopped. The silence was heavier than the gunfire. Trent's chest tightened as he realized something. She wasn't just killing. She was timing, squeezing shots between her own heartbeats, using fog, wind, echoes like instruments in an orchestra only she could hear. Then came a crack that didn't sound like the rest, sharper, longer. Trent froze. His gut knew before his mind did. A counter-sniper. Contact West Ridge, 1.9 kilometers. Her voice again, still calm, still steel. Trent raised his binoculars, but saw nothing, only gray. Her rifle barked. The round struck bare rock halfway up the ridge. A miss. Hale laughed, bitter and shaking. She's slipping. Morales cut him off. No, she's baiting. And the enemy took it. A spark of muzzle flash, just long enough. Her second shot thundered. The counter-sniper collapsed. Silence again. Even Hale said nothing this time. Trent exhaled, lowering his binoculars. His voice was quiet but certain. Overwatch, this is Lieutenant Trent. Falcon 3 is under your direction. We follow your lead. There was a pause, then a single word. Copy. No triumph, no ego, just command. The mood shifted. Doubt bled away. Porter straightened. Morales gave the smallest of nods. Even Hale unclenched his jaw. And then her voice sharpened. Enemy massing, 30 hostiles, 3 axes. Time to contact, 11 minutes. The clock started. Trent felt it sink into his chest. 30 rifles, fog thicker than concrete, 4 of them, and 1 ghost. He looked at his team, faces streaked with dirt, eyes wide, breaths fogging in the frozen air. They weren't waiting for his orders anymore. They were waiting for hers. How long were 11 minutes when 30 rifles were closing in? For Lieutenant Michael Trent, each second felt like a blade slicing closer to his throat. The clock wasn't just numbers. It was a promise of what was coming. They stumbled through the fog, boots slipping on loose shale. Their breaths burned white against the frozen air. Ahead, the rocks rose into a jagged barricade, a bluff carved by centuries of storms. Stone that looked immovable, unshakable, a wall against the valley's teeth. Trent motioned them toward it. Their lungs screamed as they ran the last stretch. When they finally dropped into cover, it felt like falling into the arms of something ancient, something that might hold for a little longer. His hands trembled as he reloaded. He forced calm into his motions. The others needed him steady, even if his pulse was pounding louder than the gunfire had been. The voice in his ear was steady as stone. Enemy forming gun team, East Ridge, 11 minutes. Trent lifted his scope. Through the shifting fog he caught a glimpse, a belt-fed monster being assembled, tripod legs sinking into snow. If it locked down, their bluff would be shredded. One shot echoed across the valley. The gunner's body arched backward, collapsing into the very weapon he had prepared. The assistant froze, just long enough for another round to erase him. Next command element, 9 minutes. Trent swallowed. He scanned until he spotted the man, a tall figure signaling with sharp, precise gestures, a commander directing the assault like an orchestra. Another crack, another body in the snow. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. What had been coordination turned into hesitation, and hesitation into panic. Morales exhaled slowly, almost a whisper. She's cutting out their brain. Hale shook his head, sweat streaking his dirt-caked face despite the cold. Doesn't matter, too many. 30 rifles against 4. His voice cracked, fear seeping out where bravado had failed. Trent slammed his hand against Hale's shoulder, harder than he meant to. She's buying us the minutes. Hold the line. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, Hale or himself. The fog pulsed with muzzle flashes. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. Demo specialist, South Slope, 7 minutes. Trent swung his scope. A shadow moved low, a heavy pack strapped to his back. Not just ammo, explosives. Trent's stomach clenched. If that man reached the bluff, their cover would be dust. Specter's rifle cracked. The pack-bearer pitched forward, the explosives never armed. The silence afterward was suffocating. Even amid chaos, there was a rhythm to her shots. It was more than skill. It was orchestration. She wasn't just saving them. She was shaping the battle. Then a shout cut through it all. Porter's voice high and frantic. Close contact, west flank. 2 shadows slipped through the fog, almost on top of them before anyone saw. Trent twisted, rifle rising too late. His heart surged into his throat. Hold, Specter whispered. Her shot threaded the gap between 2 slabs of granite, 14 inches at most. The lead fighter folded mid-step, collapsing into the man behind him. Both down before their boots hit the ground. The rest scattered, vanishing back into fog. Trent gasped, chest hammering. Morales's eye never left her scope. She muttered like she was speaking to herself. That was surgical. The clock ticked, 6 minutes. Enemy forces pressed harder. Shapes flickered in and out of the fog, ghostly figures closing from all sides. Each shot from Morales, each burst from Trent's rifle, was swallowed by the mist. Porter clung to the radio, whispering coordinates no one could hear. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. Hale's breathing turned ragged, his restlessness spilling into panic. We can't hold. We're dead here. He half rose from cover, desperation written across his face. Trent spun on him, voice sharp as a blade. She's covering us. Stand your ground or you'll get us all killed. Hale froze. His eyes darted between Trent and the fog, shame twisting across his face. He sank back down, rifle clutched tight. The valley erupted again, thunder rolling from a dozen muzzles at once. Stone fragments sliced across their faces, dust choking their lungs. Falcon 3 pressed tighter against the bluff, trying to disappear into rock. And through it all her shots. Precise, relentless, stripping the enemy apart piece by piece, breaking weapons, silencing squad leaders, cutting momentum before it could crest. It wasn't survival anymore. It was watching a master guide an orchestra of war, every bullet a note, every silence deliberate. The minutes bled away. The enemy's advance faltered, then cracked. Figures slipped back into the fog, leaving only smoke and silence. Morales lowered her scope slowly, her voice hushed. They're breaking. Trent didn't trust it until the headset spoke again. Calm, final, certain. They won't return, hold position, extraction inbound. No triumph, no relief in her tone, just fact. Then static. Trent scanned the ridges, desperate for a silhouette, a shadow, anything to prove she had been real, but the fog gave him nothing. Only the echo of her rifle remained. Hours later, dawn began to creep over Stonewall Bluff. The fog thinned into ribbons, light carving through cracks of the ridge. What had been a battlefield looked quiet now, too quiet. Porter crouched near a boulder, brushing frost away. Something metallic caught the weak sunlight. He pried it loose, holding it up between dirty fingers. A cloth patch, frayed at the edges, silver threads shaped into a coiled viper with wings outstretched. No rank, no number, nothing official. He handed it to Trent. The lieutenant turned it over in his glove. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He knew what it meant. He slipped the patch into his vest. Some things weren't meant for paperwork. The debrief later was sterile. Command asked about numbers, about terrain, about comms. No one asked about the voice. No one mentioned the ghost. Trent's answers were clipped, unreadable. That night alone in the ready room, he laid the patch out on the table. His laptop glow cut the darkness as he searched. Names, call signs, rumors. One surfaced again and again. Alexandra Keen. Her trail was smoke. No record, no rank, whole lines of reports redacted, missions erased, but always the same whisper, black veil. A mission no one spoke of, a mission that ended in silence. Some said she died there. Others said she walked away before command could bury her with the rest. But Trent stared at the patch, silver viper gleaming faintly under the weak light. He wasn't sure what to believe. All he knew was this: Spectre hadn't vanished. She had only changed the way she fought. And somewhere in the fog, she was still watching. Why hadn't command said her name? Lieutenant Michael Trent sat stiff in the debriefing room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, their glow as lifeless as the questions being asked. Numbers, enemy positions, ammunition expended, nothing that mattered. No one asked about the voice in the fog. When it was over, he walked the sterile hallway with his report in hand, his boots echoing against concrete. The base outside hummed with routine, mechanics cursing over engines, soldiers shouting cadence in the yard, but none of it touched him. He carried silence heavier than his rucksack had ever been. Back in the ready room, he closed the door and pulled the patch from his vest. Frayed cloth, silver thread, a viper with wings. He laid it on the table, staring until the lines blurred. He didn't know why it unsettled him more than the firefight itself. Maybe because it was proof. Proof that she had been there. Proof that ghosts sometimes bled. His laptop's glow cut through the dark as he typed. Search after search. Name after name. Whispers buried in after-action reports. Call signs that didn't belong to anyone. He read until his eyes burned. One name surfaced again and again, scratched into margins, sometimes blacked out, sometimes erased entirely, but always resurfacing like something that refused to drown. Alexandra Keen. No record, no rank, just whispers. Some called her Spectre. Some said she died in Black Veil, a mission so classified its very mention felt like betrayal. Others claimed she'd walked away before command could bury her like they had buried the rest. Trent leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He tried to picture her face, but all he had was her voice, low and precise, each word cutting like steel. He thought of how Morales had followed her orders without hesitation, how Porter had clung to the sound of her voice like a lifeline, how even Hale, brash, skeptical Hale, had gone silent when her bullets carved truth into the fog. They all believed, even if they couldn't say it. And now he couldn't stop himself. The door creaked. Hale stepped in, a tablet clutched in his hand. He wasn't grinning. His sarcasm, the thing that usually clung to him like a second skin, was gone. "Sir," he said quietly, "you need to see this." On the screen glowed an article. New treatment center for special operations veterans battling PTSD. Fully funded, 5 years guaranteed. The donor listed as anonymous. But the address, Montana, a ranch once belonging to Alexandra Keen. Trent read it twice. His pulse kicked harder with each word. "Not just this one," Hale said, swiping. "More files, more clippings. A scholarship fund for children of soldiers lost in Black Veil. A research grant for advanced prosthetics. A housing program for wounded operators spread across 3 states. Each one hidden under shell corporations, false fronts, nameless foundations. But every path looped back to the same shadow." Keen. Trent stared at the glow of the tablet. The truth wasn't simple anymore. It wasn't just about a sniper who had saved them. She hadn't disappeared. She had just changed weapons. Morales came in later, silent as ever. She didn't look at the patch on the table, but Trent saw her eyes flick toward it. "Spectre?" she asked softly. It wasn't really a question. Trent nodded once. Morales said nothing more. She didn't need to. Because belief was already carved into all of them. Porter wasn't as quiet. He stormed into the room hours later, slamming the door behind him, his voice sharp. "You're chasing shadows, Lieutenant, ghost stories. We should be focusing on the next mission, not digging into classified myths." But his hands trembled even as he spoke. Trent leaned forward. "You heard her, you saw what she did." Porter shook his head. "I saw fog and bullets and luck. That's all, nothing more." His eyes betrayed him, darting once toward the patch before hardening again. He didn't believe what he said. Not really, but some truths were too heavy to admit. Trent didn't press. He knew the seed was already planted. That night he unfolded the patch again. The edges were more frayed now, threads unraveling like veins. He turned it over, then back again, as if hopping it would reveal more. He thought about her voice, how it hadn't shaken, how it had sounded less like a person and more like inevitability itself. And he thought about her silence afterward, no farewell, no triumph, just static. The kind of silence only someone who had already lost too much could carry. Sleep never came. The next morning, word spread fast across the base. A whisper moving through barracks, mess halls, hangars. Soldiers swapped stories with voices low, half afraid of being overheard. Some said a sniper with no name had saved Falcon 3. Others claimed Trent had invented it to cover up command failures. But the myth was growing, and like all myths, it didn't matter what command said. It mattered what people believed. Morales passed him in the corridor later, her face unreadable. But as she walked by, she murmured one word under her breath. "Spectre." The name hung between them like smoke. Days turned into weeks, missions came and went. The mountains faded into memory, but not the voice, not for Trent. Late at night, when the base was quiet, he'd search again. Old archives, declassified fragments, whispers in forums so deep the words barely glowed against the screen. Operation Black Veil. The name surfaced like a wound refusing to close. A mission that ended in silence. Whole teams erased. Lines of text blacked out until the reports looked like grave markers. Keen's name surfaced there too, always in fragments, always as if someone had tried to erase her but hadn't quite succeeded. Trent imagined her walking away from the fire, leaving the bodies and the silence behind. He imagined her choosing exile, trading the rifle for anonymity. But if that was true, why had she come back for them? That question gnawed at him more than anything else. Weeks later, an envelope appeared on his desk. No markings, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten in block letters. Heroism isn't about medals. It's about standing in the gap when others can't. Doing what must be done because it's right. Not because anyone will know. At the bottom, 2 letters. AK. Folded inside the paper was the patch again. The same viper, the same wings. The edges were more worn now, threads fraying further, as if it had been carried through years of storms. Trent sat back, the paper trembling in his hands. He understood then. She hadn't vanished into myth. She was still out there, watching, choosing when to step into the fog. He framed the patch in plain wood and set it in his locker, not on the wall, not on display. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder. 3 weeks later, Porter came into the room holding a printout, his face pale, his usual sharpness stripped away. "Sir," he said quietly, "you'll want to see this." It was a grainy image from an overseas wire service, a barren hillside in Eastern Europe. A lone figure lay on the ridge, rifle steady, eye to scope. The silhouette was blurred, but the posture, the angle of the shoulders, the way the barrel aligned, was unmistakable. Trent stared at it for a long time. The silence stretched. Finally, he whispered, "Spectre's still out there." Outside, the base was alive with routine. Engines roaring, boots hammering concrete, orders barked into the air. But inside, Trent folded the image into his pocket, and a quiet oath formed in his chest. When the shot came again, wherever, whenever, it would land exactly where it needed to. Why would someone walk away from a war, yet never stop fighting it? Weeks had passed since Falcon 3's escape from the Iron Veil. The bruises had faded. The frostbite burns on their hands and faces had scabbed into memories. But the voice, that calm, steel-edged voice, lingered in their minds like an echo that refused to fade. Morale still heard it in her sleep. She told no one, but sometimes she woke in the dark barracks, heart racing, convinced she had just been given another set of coordinates, another wind call whispered from nowhere. She would stare into the ceiling, fists curled, waiting for the shot that always followed. Hale tried to bury it in bravado. He boasted at the bar, telling half-drunken stories to anyone who'd listen, though the details always shifted. Sometimes Spectre was 2 ridges away, sometimes 10. Sometimes she'd been an operator left behind by command, sometimes a mercenary. But when the laughter died and the crowd thinned, his eyes betrayed him. He still looked toward the fog when no one was watching. Porter was the opposite. He grew sharp-edged, brittle. Any mention of her set him off, his voice climbing into something close to rage. "Ghosts don't win firefights," he snapped more than once. "Men do, us." But the way his hand tightened around the radio at night, the way he kept scanning static for a voice he swore didn't exist, it told a different story. And Trent carried her like a weight across his chest. He'd memorized every word of her note, the sharp slant of her block letters. Heroism isn't about medals. He read it when the doubts pressed in, when the silence of command felt suffocating. But even as he studied her words, he knew they weren't enough. Because what haunted him wasn't just what she had done, it was why. Why would someone like Alexandra Keen, step back into the fight for strangers, when she had every reason to vanish? The question burned deeper than the scars. Far away in a cabin on the edge of Montana, Alexandra Keen traced the rim of a coffee cup with her finger. Steam curled into the dawn air. Outside, the fields were quiet, the fences dusted with frost. Horses moved slow in the pasture, their breath fogging like smoke. She hadn't worn a uniform in years. The patch she had once carried, the viper with wings, sat folded in a drawer. Its threads were worn thin, the silver dulled by rain, by dirt, by blood. Her rifle rested on the mantel above the fire, cleaned, oiled, silent. But her hands shook anyway, not from age, not from weakness, from memory. Black Veil. The name still struck like a hammer. It had been the kind of mission that swallowed whole teams and spat nothing back. She had carried the call sign then Spectre, a ghost moving through mountain wind and night. She remembered the last order given, the one she hadn't followed. Hold your ground. But she hadn't, not when she saw the slaughter unfolding, not when the numbers poured in against them, not when the comms cut and the ridges burned. She had pulled the trigger anyway, not for victory, but for survival, for the slim chance that someone might crawl out alive. Most hadn't. She had. And survival, she had learned, was its own kind of punishment. Her name had been erased from the books after that, her service record blacked out, entire lines of her life turned into redacted smears. But she hadn't stopped. She just changed weapons. Money instead of bullets, foundations instead of flanking maneuvers, the rifle replaced by signatures and shell companies, PTSD centers, scholarships, housing programs, quiet wars fought in boardrooms instead of valleys. Yet she still carried the rifle, still kept it ready, because sometimes the ghosts called her back. And when Falcon 3's desperate signal had reached her hidden frequency, she hadn't hesitated. Even now, weeks later, she could still feel it, the cold against her cheek, the rhythm of her heartbeat against the stock. Each shot had been another line tying her back to the past she had sworn she'd buried. Her hand tightened around the cup until the porcelain squeaked. Why had she done it? Because they had been young, too young. She'd heard it in their voices. Panic and pride, fear wrapped around duty. She remembered being like that once, before the silence had carved her into something colder. They didn't deserve to be erased like she had been. She had promised herself never to step into the fog again. But promises broke easily when silence asked the wrong question. The fire cracked in the hearth. Keen set the cup down, staring at the rifle above it. Her phone buzzed. A message, encrypted, routed through so many servers it would take months to track. One line only. Eastern Europe, coordinates, a time. Her pulse slowed, steady as it always did when the past came knocking. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the fire. She hadn't answered call signs in years, but Spectre was still alive, somewhere in the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, she was still needed. Back at the base, Trent sat in silence with the photo Porter had brought. The grainy silhouette on that barren ridge, the posture unmistakable. He couldn't shake it. Morales finally broke the quiet. She's not gone, sir, you know that. Trent's jaw tightened, then why hide? Morales's eyes narrowed slightly, her voice softer than usual. Because maybe she's seen what happens when you don't. The room fell silent again. None of them said what they were all thinking. Sometimes survival meant becoming invisible. But ghosts didn't stay hidden forever. 2 weeks later, reports surfaced. A convoy in Eastern Europe ambushed, then saved. Survivors claimed a sniper had cut through the attackers with impossible precision. No one saw her face. No one even heard her voice. Only the silence after. Trent read the lines in the report twice, his pulse hammering. It was her, it had to be. He folded the paper, slipping it into his pocket beside the worn patch. And for the first time since the mountains, he allowed himself to believe something he hadn't dared before. She wasn't just legend. She was legacy. Why did silence feel louder than bullets? The hangar was alive with noise, rotors clattering, voices shouting, metal clanging. But for Falcon 3, the air was different. Their first deployment since the Iron Veil. Their first mission since the Ghost had spoken. Trent checked his gear by rote, hands moving, eyes elsewhere. Morales cleaned her scope, each motion exact, almost ritualistic. Porter adjusted his radio, muttering under his breath. Hale paced, restless, his boots echoing off concrete. None of them said her name. Not here, not where command could hear, but the question hung between them anyway. Would she be there again? The mission itself was simple on paper: recon and support. A convoy moving through a valley known for ambushes. Falcon 3 would ride the flank, eyes open, weapons ready. Simple, clean, predictable. At least that was the lie. The mountains pressed in around the road, jagged ridges looming like sentinels. Snow clung in patches, fog curling through gullies. It looked too familiar, too much like the Iron Veil. The convoy crawled forward, engines grinding, wheels crunching frozen dirt. Falcon 3 fanned out along the side, rifles scanning ridgelines. Every shadow looked like a rifle barrel. Every silence felt staged. Trent kept his radio close, every burst of static tightening his chest. He told himself it was focus, but the truth was uglier. He was waiting, hopping, for a voice that didn't belong to command. Morales whispered over comms. South Ridge, movement small, could be rockfall, could be more. They froze. The convoy slowed, the drivers tense. Hale swore softly, feels wrong. And then the first shot came. It shattered rock off the ridge, spraying the convoy, then another, and another. The ambush wasn't subtle. It was teeth bared all at once. Fire poured down from both sides, muzzles flashing through fog. The convoy scattered as best it could. Falcon 3 dove for cover, rifles snapping upward, returning fire in bursts. Porter's voice cracked into the radio. Convoy under heavy fire, coordinates, but static swallowed his words. Dead comms again. Hale cursed, firing blind into the fog. Morales shifted, calm despite the chaos, her scope scanning for muzzle flashes. She dropped one, then another, but for every target that fell, two more seemed to appear. Trent pressed harder into cover, chest burning. The scene was too familiar, too much like last time. He waited for it, the voice. But none came. Not in the first minute, not in the second. And that was when the panic threatened to claw through his ribs. They were on their own. North flank closing, Morales shouted. Her tone was sharp, but under it there was something else, a tremor she never let anyone hear. Hale swung his weapon, spraying fire. We're boxed again. Trent's jaw clenched. He had to move. He had to be the voice this time. Morales cut east 10 meters higher ground. Porter, hold your sector, keep trying comms. Hale, cover fire now. His commands were sharp, quick, but they felt heavy. He wasn't her. He didn't have the precision that turned chaos into rhythm. All he had was desperation dressed as authority. Morales moved, her rifle barking. Porter hunched tighter over his radio, static screaming back. Hale swore but laid down a curtain of fire, brass clattering at his knees. For a moment the tide slowed, just a breath, enough to believe they might hold. And then a rocket streaked from the ridge. It slammed into the lead convoy truck, fireball erupting, heat rolling down the valley. The blast threw dirt and snow into the air, a shockwave flattening them to the ground. Trent's ears rang, his vision blurred. He struggled upright, heart clawing against his ribs. They were losing fast. He wanted to scream into the void, to beg the silence for that voice again. But nothing came. Then faintly Morales spoke, not to him, to herself. She'd know what to do, she'd already have them lined up. Trent looked at her, dirt streaked across her cheek, her hands steady despite the chaos. She believed, still. Hale shouted something. Porter slammed his radio against a rock, static spitting. The convoy burned. Trent forced himself to move, to lead, to act without the ghost. Shift position, South Bluff, go. They scrambled. Morales firing with mechanical precision. Hale hurling curses with every round, Porter dragging his pack like it weighed double. The enemy fire shifted, cutting into the bluff, hammering stone into splinters. And then, a crack. Not close, not from them, distant, too perfect. One muzzle flash on the ridge blinked out. Trent froze, his chest tightened. Another crack, another flash gone. Hale swore, his voice breaking. No way. Trent didn't breathe, didn't dare. Then the headset, for the first time since the Iron Veil, hissed. Enemy overwatch, East Ridge, 3 rifles. You have 30 seconds before they cut the bluff. Move. Her voice, calm, steady, certain. Morales didn't wait. She bolted forward, boots kicking ice. Trent shouted the command as if it was his, but he knew it was. It never was. Spectre had returned. For the next 5 minutes, the battlefield changed. Every time the voice cut through, a path opened. Every time the rifle cracked, another muzzle fell silent. The convoy, what was left of it, pushed through the valley under her cover. Falcon 3 moved like they had before, trusting, following, surviving. And when the enemy broke, retreating back into fog, the silence rushed in again. No farewell, no triumph, just static. Trent sank behind cover, his chest heaving, sweat cold on his skin despite the snow. Morales lowered her rifle slowly, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. Hale's hands shook as he reloaded, his voice barely above a whisper. We'd be dead without her. Porter didn't argue this time. He just sat against the rock, his radio slack in his hands, eyes distant. Trent closed his eyes. She had come back. But why only when she chose? Far away, in another forgotten corner of the world, Alexandra Keen packed her rifle into a case lined with cloth worn smooth from years. Her hands were steady now, not shaking like they did when she was alone. She had heard the panic in their voices. She had heard the desperation breaking through their orders. That was why she had answered. But as the case clicked shut, her chest ached with a truth she couldn't ignore. Every time she returned, she lost a little more of the silence she had fought so hard to build. And silence, she knew, was the only weapon she had left to protect herself. How much could 4 soldiers hold when an army came for them? The convoy smoke still drifted through the valley, black ribbons curling into gray sky. Burned metal hissed against snow, the air sharp with cordite and ash. Falcon 3 crouched behind the bluff, lungs ragged, skin slick with sweat despite the cold. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the headset came alive again. Enemy massing, 3 squads, multiple axes, time to contact 7 minutes. Her voice, calm, sharp, like she was reading the battlefield from a vantage no one else could see. Trent's chest tightened. They'd barely survived the last wave. Now more were coming, twice as many, maybe 3. Hale's voice cracked. We can't hold this, not against that. Morales chambered another round with a snap of her hand. We don't have a choice. Her tone was flat, iron in it, but even she knew the odds. Trent forced his breathing steady. He wanted to sound like a commander, not a desperate man clinging to a ghost's directions. We hold until extraction. Nothing else matters. Static hissed, then her voice again. Stonewall Bluff is your only cover. If you leave it, you'll be overrun. Her certainty was absolute. They believed it because they had no other choice. The first shots came before the 7th minute was gone. Figures poured from the mist, rifles flashing, moving in waves like shadows bleeding into one another. The sound hit like thunder, rolling across stone, hammering the bluff. Shards of rock bit into their skin. Falcon 3 returned fire, controlled bursts, brass clattering at their knees. Each trigger pull was survival, nothing more. Then her shot cracked. One figure dropped, then another, then another. It wasn't random. It wasn't just shooting. Each strike was deliberate. She was cutting their momentum, slicing away squad leaders, silencing heavy weapons before they could pin the bluff. Morales fired alongside her, their rhythms almost overlapping. She whispered into her mic without realizing it. "She's directing the fight." Trent heard it. He knew it was true. He didn't say it aloud. The enemy pressed harder, pushing closer, their rifles chewing into the stone. Hale roared as he fired, his weapon rattling against his shoulder. But even his fury couldn't slow the tide. Too many were buried here. The headset cut in, sharp as a blade. "North Ridge, RPG team, 3 seconds to fire." Trent spun his scope, catching a faint glint. His stomach lurched. Morales. Her rifle cracked. The launcher dropped, its rocket clattering harmlessly into the snow. Hale froze mid-curse, starring, "She's everywhere." But she wasn't everywhere. She was one rifle, one voice, one human being. Trent knew it, even if the others didn't, and that truth scared him more than the bullets. The firefight swelled. Minutes dragged like hours. The bluff shook with each impact. Their ammunition thinned, magazines discarded in piles. 2 minutes, Spector's voice cut through, still steady, still certain. "South slope, breach team with charges." Trent's blood ran cold. If they blew the bluff, it was over. "On it," Morales said, shifting her rifle. Her shot snapped, then another. The breach team collapsed in the snow before they ever reached the stone. The silence afterward was fleeting. More rifles cracked, more figures pressed through fog. Falcon 3 was breaking. Porter's radio lay dead in his lap, static chewing in his ears. His hands trembled as he held it, muttering to himself. Come on, someone answer." Hale's voice was raw, almost pleading. "We're not walking out this time." Trent grabbed his shoulder, forcing his eyes to his. "You stand, you fight, or none of us walk out." But the truth clawed at Trent too. They were inches from collapse. And then her voice again, softer this time, almost human. "Hold 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Could they survive 30 more?" Trent clenched his jaw. He would make them. He had to. They poured every last round into the fog, teeth gritted, lungs burning. Then, the roar of engines. Above the valley, the faint thump of rotors cut through the gunfire. Extraction. The enemy faltered, scattered, retreating into the mist like smoke dissolving. The bluff shook with silence. Falcon 3 slumped against the stone, chests heaving, hands raw, faces streaked with sweat and dirt. Trent pressed a hand against his earpiece. "Overwatch, we're still here. We're." Static. She was gone. No farewell, no promise, only silence. The rotors grew louder, the extraction bird breaking through fog, searchlights sweeping the valley. They climbed aboard, one by one, their bodies heavy, their minds heavier. Inside the bird, Morales stared at the floor, her rifle across her knees. She finally spoke, voice low, almost reverent. "She saved us again." Hale leaned back, head against the bulkhead, eyes closed. "Or cursed us. We're nothing without her." Porter said nothing. He just clutched the dead radio in his lap. Trent sat in silence. He wanted to tell them they were more than this, that they could stand without her, that survival wasn't just borrowed courage. But he couldn't, because part of him believed Hale was right. They had fought like soldiers, but they had survived like shadows, shadows of a ghost who refused to be seen. Far away, Alexandra Keen leaned against the trunk of her truck, snow dusting her jacket. Her rifle case sat in the passenger seat. The extraction bird had lifted hours ago, carrying Falcon 3 away. She lit a match, the flame trembling against the wind, and touched it to a cigarette. The smoke curled into the night. Her hands were steady, always steady when the fight was over. But her chest ached. Every time she answered, she risked becoming visible again, and visibility was death. Yet she couldn't stop. Not when she heard the fear in their voices. Not when she remembered what it felt like to be pinned, to be abandoned, to count the seconds until the end. She exhaled smoke, watching it fade into the dark. She had promised herself silence, but silence was the one promise she could never keep. Why did survival feel so much like failure? The helicopter roared through night skies. Falcon 3 slumped in the back like broken statues. Their bodies were alive, but something inside them had been hollowed out. The crew chief shouted over the noise, asking if they were all right. None of them answered. Morales kept her rifle across her knees, cleaning it in silence as though the act itself kept her tethered to reality. She moved with mechanical precision, but her eyes, dark, unblinking, stared into something far away. Hale leaned against the bulkhead, helmet tipped forward, his fists clenching and unclenching. His bravado was gone. In its place was a gnawing dependence he couldn't voice. He had mocked the ghost once. Now he feared what he was without her. Porter sat rigid, his radio in his lap, his thumb pressed white against the button though the line was dead. He whispered once, barely audible, "Say something," but the static was empty. And Trent just stared at the floor. The patch weighed heavy in his pocket. He wanted to believe they'd survived because of him, because of his leadership, but the truth was carved into every bullet she had fired for them. When the bird landed, the base swallowed them back into routine. Debrief was quick, sterile. Command listed the dead, counted the trucks lost, asked nothing about the voice. It was easier to ignore myths, easier to file silence into paperwork. But Falcon 3 couldn't ignore it. Later in the ready room, the four of them sat without speaking. The hum of the air vent was the only sound. Finally, Morales broke the silence. "She saved us again." Hale's laugh was brittle. "Or maybe we're cursed. You don't get it, Morales. We're not soldiers anymore. We're just bait waiting for a ghost to bail us out." Morales's jaw tightened. "She's the reason you're breathing." "She's the reason I can't breathe," Hale snapped, slamming a fist into the table. His voice cracked, desperation spilling out. "I close my eyes and I hear her. Every order, every shot, she owns us. You don't see it." Porter finally looked up, his face pale, sweat glistening at his temples. His voice was sharp, brittle. "There is no her, it's smoke, static. Some operator out there, maybe, or command messing with us. You're all worshipping a ghost." "Then why are you still clutching that radio?" Morales's eyes cut through him, flat as her scope. Porter froze. His hand tightened around the dead radio. He didn't answer. Trent finally spoke, his voice low, measured. "We don't get to choose the form survival takes. You can doubt, you can curse it, but you don't ignore it, not when it saves you twice." His words silenced them, but only for a moment. Because silence didn't erase fractures, it only widened them. That night Trent sat alone again. The laptop glow lit his face as he scrolled through more fragments, more whispers. Black Veil, the mission that had broken her. Reports redacted into black blocks, whole paragraphs erased. But here and there, small fragments escaped the eraser's hand, enough to sketch the outline of something monstrous. A valley, a team of 40, an ambush that lasted 3 days, no survivors. Except one. Alexandra Keen. He leaned back, the name burning into his chest. What did it mean to be the last one standing, to carry every silence left behind? He imagined her on that ridge, heart hammering, pulling the trigger again and again until nothing moved but her own breath. And then, the silence after, the kind of silence that stayed for years. He wondered if that was why her voice sounded the way it did. Calm, steady, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had been burned out of her long ago. Meanwhile, miles away, Alexandra sat in a small apartment in a nameless city. The walls were bare, the lights dim. Her rifle leaned against the corner, oiled, silent. She poured herself a glass of water, staring at her hands. They didn't shake. They never did anymore, not when she held steel. But when she closed her eyes, she saw their faces. Not Falcon 3, the others, the ones who hadn't made it out of Black Veil. She heard their voices, the way they had shouted into comms that never answered, the way silence had swallowed them one by one. And she remembered the order she had broken. Hold your ground. She hadn't. She had moved. She had fought her way out. And because of that, she had lived when none of them did. Survival, she knew, was not a gift. It was a weight. Every time she picked up the rifle again, she felt that weight press heavier. Why had she saved Falcon 3? Why had she broken her silence? Because she had heard in their voices what she once had in hers: youth, desperation, belief that someone was listening. And she couldn't let them be erased the way her team had been. But she knew what it cost her. Every shot drew her back into the war she had tried to leave. Every word she spoke over the radio chained her to ghosts she could never outrun. She finished the glass, setting it down with care. Her reflection in the window looked hollow, older than her years. The world outside was moving on, but she was trapped in the same fog. Back at the base, the fractures in Falcon 3 deepened. Hale drank more. Porter snapped at shadows. Morales grew sharper, colder, as though she had to become stone to keep standing. And Trent carried silence like it was another piece of gear strapped to his chest. One night Porter burst into the ready room, his voice raw. "She's not real, you hear me? Not real, we can't keep pretending." But Morales stood, her face inches from his, her tone cutting like a blade. "Then who saved your life? Who threaded that bullet between your head and mine? Who silenced those charges before you even saw them?" Porter's voice broke. His lips trembled. He didn't answer, he just left. Hale muttered into the dark, "We're ghosts already, just waiting to fade like she did." Trent said nothing, because for the first time he feared Hale might be right. The myth had kept them alive, but the myth was eating them from the inside. And somewhere far away, Alexandra Keen stared at her rifle in the dark. Her silence had been broken, again. And the ghosts of Black Veil were stirring. Why do some names vanish from the books, yet never from the battlefield? The question haunted Lieutenant Michael Trent long after the smoke had cleared. Weeks passed. Missions came and went. Falcon 3 did their jobs, kept their heads down, and marched like soldiers were expected to. But under the armor, under the orders, the silence gnawed at them. Every time the fog rolled in on an op, they paused, listening. Every time the comms hissed with static, Porter tightened his grip on the radio. Every time Morales raised her rifle, she waited for a voice that wasn't there. And every time it didn't come, the weight settled heavier. Hale spiraled fastest. He drank too much, laughed too loud, fought too often. And when the noise faded, he stared at walls as if waiting for them to dissolve into mist. Porter carried his denial like armor, insisting louder and louder that it was all coincidence, all luck, all tricks of the fog. But the way he clenched the dead radio told another story. Morales grew colder, sharper, like she was chiseling herself into something that could survive without needing anyone. And Trent carried the patch everywhere. The viper with wings, frayed and silver. He touched it like some men touched rosaries. He didn't pray, but in the quiet he whispered anyway. Because he knew she could hear, somewhere. One night another envelope appeared on his desk. No markings, no seal. Inside, a single line handwritten in block letters. "You survived because you stood together. Don't forget it." No name, no initials this time. Only the patch folded inside again, edges worn almost to threads. Trent sat with it for hours, his chest heavy. She was reminding him it wasn't her, not only her, it was them too. But he didn't know if he believed it. Across an ocean, Alexandra Keen watched a convoy crawl along a snow-bitten road. She lay prone on a ridge, scope steady, her breath invisible in the wind. She wasn't there to fight, not unless she had to. But habit had its own gravity. Every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat of the ground below called to her like old hymns. Her finger brushed the trigger, and memory came flooding back. Black veil, the screams, the silence, the endless echo of rifles in fog. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She had saved Falcon 3, but in doing so, she had cracked the wall she'd spent years building. Now the calls kept finding her. Coordinates in the dark, places where silence hung too heavy and lives teetered on the edge. She answered them, always because she could not. But each time she did, the ghosts of her past pressed closer. Back at the base, Trent's obsession deepened. He pulled strings, dug into old files, cross-referenced names scratched in forgotten corners. What he found wasn't proof, never proof, just fragments, enough to sketch her shadow but never catch her face. He learned of missions in places no one admitted operators had been. Firefights ended before they began. Convoys saved by invisible shots. Hostages freed when every clock had already run out. Always the same whisper, a phantom sniper, a woman, a ghost. Spectre. The name wasn't written in ink. It was carved in fear and hope, passed like contraband among soldiers who needed to believe someone was still watching. But what gnawed at Trent most wasn't the myth, it was the silence around it. Command never spoke of her, never acknowledged, never denied. Because sometimes, he realized, silence is the easiest way to erase someone. And Alexandra Keen had been erased long before he ever heard her voice. Still, she left ripples. Anonymous donations funding veterans' programs. Foundations no one could trace, helping widows, orphans, wounded. Grants under false names, supporting research that gave amputees back their hands, their legs, their dignity. Trent pieced it together. She was still fighting, not with a rifle alone, but with everything she had left. And he wondered, did she know what it cost? Did she know that every time she pulled the trigger in some forgotten valley, another team like his would cling harder to her shadow, unable to stand without it? Or did she simply accept it, because the alternative was silence? Weeks later, a grainy photograph appeared on the wire. Eastern Europe again, a lone figure prone on a ridge, scope glinting in winter sun. The posture was unmistakable, the patience, the way the rifle aligned with the earth itself. Falcon 3 crowded around the printout in silence. No one spoke. Finally, Morales said what they were all thinking. She's still out there. Hale muttered something rough, but his voice cracked before he finished. Porter swallowed hard, his denial shrinking to nothing. Trent just stared. He didn't smile, he didn't exhale. Because seeing proof didn't ease the weight, it only deepened it. That night he sat alone again, the patch laid out before him. The frayed thread seemed ready to unravel completely. He thought of her note. Heroism isn't about medals. It's about standing in the gap when others can't. He whispered the words aloud. His voice trembled. Maybe she wasn't just a sniper. Maybe she wasn't just a myth. Maybe she was both. And maybe that was the point. Because soldiers didn't need saints. They needed reminders that someone somewhere would answer when the silence grew too heavy. Across the ocean, Alexandra Keen folded her rifle into its case. She placed the Viper patch inside, where it had always been. Her hands lingered on it for a moment before closing the lid. She didn't need medals, didn't need recognition. The silence she carried was her penance and her purpose. The world would never know her name. But somewhere, on a bluff in the Iron Veil Mountains, 4 soldiers had lived because she had chosen to break her silence. And somewhere tomorrow, or next month, or years from now, someone else would live for the same reason. She moved to the window, staring into the dark horizon. The world slept, but she couldn't. Because when silence calls, some ghosts have no choice but to answer. And when her next shot came, it would land exactly where it needed to. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.